The courtroom was suffocating. The judge directed a question straight at me. Whom do you wish to live with, child? Everyone expected me to choose Amanda. Amanda was the one who provided stability and the warmth of a mother's love. But I didn't. Instead, I turned my gaze toward Bruce, who stood a few feet anyway and caressed the belly of his mistress. Bruce looked genuinely surprised when I pointed at him, but in his eyes, I wasn't more than a mere afterthought. After all, I was just a daughter, not the son he'd always wanted. To him, I was a placeholder, a girl who'd eventually marry off and leave the family name behind. When the judge asked for my reasons, I spoke with the innocent conviction only a child could have. Daddy's so pitiful. He just wants to be with Helen. What's wrong with that? Daddy has to work hard to make money, and Helen is pregnant. I need to help Daddy take care of my little brother inside her. Mom's always busy teaching, but she can't have a son and won't let Daddy have one with someone else. Mom's the mean one. I glanced at Mom, whose face was buried in her hands. Her body shook with sobs. But I knew better. I knew my mother. Behind those trembling fingers, she was stifling a laugh. This was all part of the plan. She played her part and I played mine. Suddenly, the world around me flickered out, and with a blink, I was thrust back to the very year my parents decided to part ways. Amanda had yet to discover Bruce's affair with that young model. She hadn't stormed into his office, confronting him. It was the dead of night, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. Time was running out. Tomorrow, Amanda would stumble upon the telltale signs of Bruce's betrayal on his phone after he failed to come home one night. This discovery would push her past her limits, and she would decide it was time to face him and end their marriage. I sprang out of bed and raced toward the master bedroom, my small fist pounding on the door. This evening was my prime, perhaps only, chance to step in and stop the heartbreak of my history from unfolding anew. Rang. Amanda, groggy and disoriented, opened it, her eyes heavy with sleep. She looked at me, puzzled by my nighttime urgency. What's wrong, sweetie? Without a word, I slipped past her, quickly locking the door behind me. Sitting on her bed, I took a deep breath and let it all spill out. I told her everything because I knew, apart from myself, no one loved me more than my mother. I carefully avoided any mention of my death, which was too painful. Instead, I focused on how we could take control and stop Bruce from destroying our lives. Her eyes were welled up with tears. Sensing the words I couldn't voice, she drew me into a tight embrace. There, in the comforting cocoon of her arms, I absorbed her warmth, finding solace in her protective hold. I looked up at her. He's been paranoid, installing cameras around the house, thinking you'd cheat on him, while he's the one cheating. Thankfully he hadn't stood to putting cameras in me NENYAAM. Anyway, and Sahitant Knave safely disclosed everything to Amanda right there. He suggested she secretly collect proof, and go straight for a divorce. I assured her that in court, I would opt to stay with Bruce. Watching her eyes brim with tears and her voice halting, I placed my hand over her mouth softly. Mom, do you believe in me? I swear, I'll see to it that you live well from now on. After the court hearing, I moved into a luxurious riverside villa with Bruce, slipping effortlessly into the role of the caring daughter. It wasn't suspicion that struck me when Bruce, despite his financial troubles, managed to move into a luxurious villa instead. I was excitedly talking about how Helen would have an easier time with the baby in a bigger house. I ran to my father, eager to show my support, insisting I would take good care of the little brother in Helen's belly. Perhaps out of some lingering paternal affection, Bruce immediately transferred $50,000 to me, telling me to use it as I saw fit. He was quick to return to work, dropping us off before rushing off again. His haste wasn't lost on me. I wasn't a child, so I knew what it meant. And I bet Helen knew even better. The moment Bruce left, Helen White dropped her facade of kindness. She snapped at me, calling me shameless and scolding me for being so demanding despite my age. There was something unreadable in her eyes as she harshly pinched my forehead with her sharp nails, snatched my phone, and transferred the $50,000 Bruce had just given me to herself. She leaned in close, her voice dripping with authority. If you dare tell your father, things will get much worse for you. Understand? I nodded, playing the part of the frightened child, but inside, I was laughing at her transparent attempt to control me. The next morning, I placed a simple breakfast of bread and jam on the expensive table. Bruce, fresh from his morning routine, couldn't hide his disgust. He struggled to swallow the bland breakfast, his eyes meeting mine, full of hope. With a moment's hesitation, he took a bite, only to spit it out immediately, his face contorting in disgust. I secretly chuckled inside. This was my specially crafted culinary disaster, designed to be unpalatable. When he finally recovered from the taste, he frowned and scolded, "Where did you get this breakfast? It's awful. You're old enough to buy something decent." Then, noticing my unfit school uniform, he asked with irritation, "I gave you money to spend as you see fit. Can't you buy a new uniform? You're embarrassing me by going out like that." At this point, Helen, who was awakened by the commotion, leaned lazily against the railing. Her pregnant belly was prominently visible. She watched the scene unfold with amusement. She probably thought I was getting another round of scolding. My lips curled into a slight smile, though I made sure my face wore a mask of grievance. Inside, however, I was thrilled. Everyone's here. Showtime. Tears welled up in my eyes effortlessly, falling like pearls, evoking sympathy from anyone who looked my way. I met Bruce's gaze with a wronged expression, sniffling before I spoke. "Dad, don't blame Helen, but she took my money." "Oops. Helen said not to tell you." "Helen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let it slip. Please don't make me leave." I wailed as if I'd accidentally let something slip, apologizing fearfully to Helen. The act was flawless. I burst into soft sobs, apologizing repeatedly and pleading not to be thrown out. It was a great performance. Perhaps moved by my act, or maybe just fed up with Helen's arrogance, Bruce turned to Helen and harshly rebuked, "You're not my wife yet. If you don't give me a son, get lost." The words were like music to my ears. In a conciliatory gesture, he handed me his card. Observing Helen's barely contained fury, I acted as if I was taking the card with great reluctance, which only prompted Bruce to scoff. "Petty," he muttered. I accepted his scolding, though the corners of my mouth betrayed me, rising with a joy that was tough to contain. I assumed Helen would keep a low profile for some time after the incident. After all, one would think even the most brazen would want to preserve some semblance of dignity. However, as I should have anticipated, the vigor of a mistress, particularly one who had successfully become pregnant, was limitless. The very next day, she struck back. She mixed crushed peanuts into my breakfast, knowing full well I had a mild peanut allergy, right before my school placement exams. I laughed coldly to myself and accidentally spilled the oatmeal all over her pregnant belly. The autumn air did cool the oatmeal's heat, but the sudden sensation on her skin made her jump in fright, and like many pregnant women, her pelvic floor muscles gave way, causing her to wet herself. Her face flushed crimson. Bruce, standing just a few feet away, looked at her with clear disgust before turning away and walking out of the room. Her fingers turned white as she clutched her skirt. A week later, she decided to hit back by paying my classmates to bully me. It was hilarious. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just another student. I was the class president, elected unanimously. I took the money and treated the entire class to a barbecue instead. We all ate to our heart's content, laughing. 2 weeks later, Helen, despite her pregnancy, tried something even more desperate. She staged a fall, blatantly attempting to frame me for causing her to slip. I just felt confused. Then, I pointed upwards to the 3 newly installed cameras on the ceiling that provided full coverage with no blind spots. I mentally asked, "Are you a fool?" Her pupils contracted in panic as she realized her little performance had been captured on camera. Without a word, she got up as if nothing had happened. After all that fuss, I was unscathed, but the fallout was even more bitter for her. My unfaithful father became even less inclined to come home. Now Helen was confined at home, her pregnancy keeping her mostly indoors, while Bruce continued to make out with other women outside. I went to school each day with a spring. I even played the part of the dutiful child in front of Bruce, charming him into driving me to school himself. As a result, everyone at school knew that my dad was a powerful man with money, influence, and prestige, making it even less likely for anyone to dare mess with me. From that point on, Helen seemed to give in, pouring all her attention into the pregnancy. In the meantime, I'd sneak away to spend time with Amanda, indulging her with shopping sprees on Bruce's credit card. Of course, Bruce wasn't exactly thrilled about the constant drain on his finances. So to smooth things over, I'd make a pit stop at a flea market on my way home, pick up something cheap, have it prettily wrapped, and then exaggerate its price when I got back. Finally, I managed to keep the extra cash for myself, cleverly tucking away the difference. But I knew this little game couldn't last forever. I was already thinking of other ways to bring in money. However, before I could even start, Helen was ready to give birth. After a frantic rush to the hospital, she delivered a healthy baby boy, sending him into raptures of joy, and his attitude toward her softened considerably. He had yearned for a son for ages, from before my time to the present, and now his dream was realized. Right after her postpartum recovery, Helen begged Bruce to make their relationship official by getting married. I clicked my tongue in disbelief, exclaiming, "Men like my dad weren't built for loyalty." His infidelity knows no bounds, spreading evenly among all the beauties he meets. Certainly, Helen's beauty was unmistakable. She had the kind of allure that could make her a standout in the entertainment world, if not become an instant star. Yet, aspirations differed from person to person. Helen chose the security and affection of being a beloved wife over the pursuit of personal ambitions, or the independence of soaring solo. She triumphed over all her rivals, cementing her position with the birth of her son. With the legal bond of marriage, she likely believed her status was now beyond challenge, yet she couldn't abandon her former habits, resuming her attempts to dominate me. This time, she claimed I was a disturbance to her cherished little one. Taking advantage of the situation, I lamented to Bruce about feeling unwelcome at home. Since Helen had just scored a significant feat by giving Bruce a son, he was now completely at her service, attending to her every whim. Consequently, he arranged for me to live in a generous apartment near a prestigious university, providing me with a substantial allowance for my expenses. Truth be told, if this was what it meant to suffer, I wouldn't mind enduring such injustices a few more times. With money in my pocket, everything became easier. Become SVIP. Read Al SVIP stories. I ventured to the nearby university and enlisted some stunning college students to distribute flyers for tutoring gigs around their campus. After an initial screening, I selected 9 tutors to join my venture. I then sprang into action, directly pitching to parents at the transition points between primary and secondary education, as well as targeting local high schools PM right on the spot. I impressed them with my abilities, reciting poetry from memory and solving complex high school math problems in real time. My tutoring center took off with great success. Well before I secured the appointment, I had all my ducks in a row for opening shop. I was the epitome of a good kid. Breaking the law was never on my agenda. While claiming to pay my tutors generously, I funneled the profits into my own account and instructed Amanda to covertly purchase loose shares from Bruce's company. He might have held the majority stake, but his focus was on charming women, leaving him blind to the corporate maneuvers happening under his nose. Our stealthy acquisitions didn't raise any alarms. He was probably too entangled in romantic escapades to notice. By the time Amanda held more shares than any other individual shareholder, becoming the second largest, I had reached high school, and my brother was now 3 years old. Children grew up in the blink of an eye, and I limited my visits to the family villa to holidays, otherwise keeping my distance. I told everyone I was buckling down on academics, with plans to accelerate into university. Initially, Bruce doubted my academic prowess, assuming I was just sulking and avoiding home. All he could do was provide financial support, which I took, acting as if I was disheartened. However, just like they say, every cloud has a silver lining. In my excitement, I let loose on the exams, not restraining my abilities, which led to my teacher insisting on advancing me by 2 years, directly approaching the principal with the proposal. Why? Well, pretending to be any younger would have been too much of a stretch for me. This academic jump left Bruce in awe. Suddenly, he stopped pushing me to move back into the villa. Instead, he gave me a lot more freedom. If I'd known that jumping grades would give me this kind of leverage, I would have done it ages ago. But then, as I spent more time around my brother, I started noticing something odd. Sure, the kid's features were fine, but none of them resembled Bruce's. In fact, he bore a strange resemblance to that popular actor who was the talk of the town in my former life. It felt like the pieces of the puzzle were finally clicking into place. I was on the verge of uncovering the truth. That very night, I reached out online to a master of physiognomy, Mike, whose insights into fate through facial features I had been quietly following for some time. I didn't fully believe in his skills, but I enjoyed his streams for the entertainment and the juicy gossip he'd spill. Still, from what I'd seen, Mike seemed to have more than just a knack for reading faces. I hesitated for a moment and sent him Bruce's photo through a private message, asking him to check out Bruce's prospects for children. Mike glanced at the photo and said, "This one's too touched up. I can't see clearly. Send me a natural shot, girl." I was startled. PM, how did he know I was a girl? My social media profile was disguised with a male classmate's photo. I murmured, this old guy really has something going for him. I quickly got out of bed, making a swift path to the living room, where Bruce was enveloped by the flickering light of the TV. I launched into an unexpected photo session. Fronts in the bag. Now, let's see that profile. Perfect. Flash me a smile for the close-up. And now, the full upper body to top it off, I announced with excitement. He looked utterly confused, but I made up some excuse on the spot, blaming it on a school project. After sending over dozens of fresh photos to Mike, he paused during his live stream, glanced at them, and then said with a sigh, "Little trouble, you're just wasting my storage space." But then, he gave me a clear answer. Bruce was destined to have a weak bond with children. I would be his only child. Oh boy, Helen's doomed, isn't she? I exclaimed. I was practically rubbing my hands in excitement as I gathered all the evidence, ready to confront her. But just as I was about to make my move, I got a call from the hospital. Amanda was in an accident. By the time I rushed to the hospital, I could only stand there, watching through the thick glass as Amanda lay covered in tubes. A piercing pain shot through me, spreading from my heart to every corner of my body. Fragmented memories flooded back, Amanda on a hospital bed, the flat line on the heart monitor, and my own screams erupting from my chest. The scene morphed before my eyes. Above, the sky was an expanse of brooding darkness. My hands were stained, and the blood was everywhere. I snapped my eyes open. Fury set my eyes ablaze. I remembered everything now. Amanda fought tooth and nail in the divorce agreement, making countless sacrifices just to secure my custody. Bruce was the CEO of Grandeur Entertainment. Amanda, on the other hand, was a beloved teacher at a prestigious high school. But their story wasn't one of those fairy tales where a rich heir fell head over heels for a simple girl. My parents built their life from the ground up, weathering every storm together. Even after we started to live more comfortably, Amanda never gave up her passion for teaching. In my previous life, under her careful and loving guidance, I earned a spot at the nation's top university. But while she poured everything into raising me and working late into the night, her health began to crumble. It got so bad that she eventually suffered kidney failure, and the cost of her daily dialysis began to drain our savings dry. Desperate, I swallowed my pride and went to Bruce. I held tight to the notion that, despite everything, I was his biological daughter. With this in mind, I harbored a fragile hope that his shared history with Amanda might stir some compassion within him, compelling him to aid her in her battle against the relentless grip of disease. But I was turned away at the door of his luxurious office. The receptionist, with a sneer that still haunts me, treated me like a beggar or a scam artist. Chasing after riches, gold digger. Maybe you should check your reflection. It's no secret that the boss only has a son, who was just 10 years old. I wanted to argue that I was his daughter. But before I could, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. My body froze and I bit back my tears, too humiliated to let them fall. Not long after, I received the news that I had topped the SAT, earning the highest score in the entire state. Suddenly, my face was splashed across every newspaper, and my story was known by every household. But even with this newfound fame, all I could think about was how I was going to pay for Amanda's medical bills. I asked Eric Kingsley, my classmate, if he knew of any tutoring jobs. For 3 years, we shared a desk. He came from a lineage steeped in literature, and this heritage bestowed upon him a scholarly grace that meshed seamlessly with the vibrant zest of his youth. This combination was so utterly enchanting that one couldn't help but be drawn to him. To say I felt nothing for him would be dishonest. It was in those electric moments that the spark of young love ignited. A single exchanged glance was all it took for us to communicate, as though our hearts whispered to each other in a language only we understood. Thanks to my title as the top scorer and his glowing recommendations, my tutoring schedule quickly filled up. For the first time, I could cover Amanda's medical expenses without worrying about where the money would come from. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and miraculously, Amanda's health began to improve. But then, disaster struck. My tutoring classes were reported because I didn't have a license. By law, I had to refund all the fees I'd collected and pay a fine 5 times the amount. It was as if the sky had fallen. My students, confused and concerned, stared at me. The classroom was the cramped rental where Amanda and I lived. There was no room for financial extras. The little money I made teaching barely stuck around, disappearing as quickly as learned it. The hospital bills flowed out like an endless river. Each treatment demanded payment. If I lost this job, how on earth would I cover those costs? I hugged myself tightly and wept aloud. Eric, ever the gentle soul, sent the students away and handed me tissues to wipe my tears. My eyes were red and swollen, and through my sobs, I asked him what I should do next. Before that moment, I had been sheltered from the world's harshness. But now, in the blink of an eye, I was forced to grow up to bear the weight of our family's survival like an adult. There was a knock at the door. Eric opened it, letting in someone unexpected. Dressed in an expensive suit, Bruce looked out of place in our cozy home. He smiled politely at Eric, thanking him for his help. Watching their casual interaction sent a chill down my spine. Bruce offered to fund my university education and cover all of Amanda's medical expenses. With a snap of his fingers, he could erase all the helplessness I'd been feeling. His sole stipulation was that I had to make an appearance at his company's initial public offering event. He intended to leverage my reputation as the highest academic achiever to elevate his company's prestige. It wasn't just any day that a wealthy CEO got the chance to brag about his daughter, especially when she had nailed the SAT with top scores. I had no reason to refuse, and truth be told, I didn't have the courage to. That evening, as I prepared to bring Amanda her soup, my phone rang. It was the hospital. My heart dropped. Amanda was dying. I didn't remember ending the call or the frantic dash to the hospital. But the stark reality was clear. I was too late to say goodbye to my mother. The doctor explained, with a sympathetic look, that her condition had deteriorated alarmingly fast, probably triggered by an intense emotional surge. The nurse who was on duty that day mentioned seeing an elegant woman in her 30s enter Amanda's room. Desperate for answers, I tried to view the security tapes, but the hospital staff exploited my vulnerability. They looked at me and saw nothing but a young girl, easy to brush aside. Without a moment's hesitation, they called security to march me out the door. Deep down, I knew who that woman was. I had seen her once during my parents' divorce. But I couldn't understand why she wouldn't just leave us alone. What had we done to deserve this? After the funeral, I lingered at the cemetery long after everyone had left. On my way back, I was intercepted by my brother I had never met. Although he was just 10 years old, his body had the bulk of an adult, likely from too much good eating. Meanwhile, my own arms were thin and petite, truly reflecting the youth of a girl who was 10 years old. He and his cronies dragged me by the hair into a secluded alley, a place so sparse in residents it felt eerily abandoned. There, my cries for help were useless, only fueling their excitement. Their blows rained down on me, each one harder than the last. I curled up into a ball, hoping that if I endured it long enough, they'd grow tired and leave me alone. But the pain was relentless, sharper with each passing moment. My vision blurred, a veil of blood clouding my eyes. As I lay there gasping for breath, I thought of Amanda. At least her medical debts wouldn't burden me anymore. I also thought of the university I'd never get to see, wondering if it was as beautiful as they said. Such a pity. There would be no second chances for me, but why? Why did the glimmer of hope in our lives have to fade just when things were starting to look up? My thoughts jerked back to reality. My mind was focused on one dark desire. I wanted to kill all of them. I reached for the doorknob, ready to storm out of the hospital room, but then I saw Mike. His solemn eyes were fixed on me. "Girl," he said, "don't do something you'll regret. If not for yourself, then do it for your mother. She still has a chance in this life." My feet froze in place. Inside, my soul was screaming, no. Why should I spare them? They all deserve to die. But what came out of my mouth was quieter. "Isn't this all just some illusion? Why do you say that, Mr. Sage?" In my previous existence, when death claimed me, my soul was seething with such anger that even the gates of hell barred my entry. Sharon, the ferryman of the underworld, wouldn't take my coin, scared that it wouldn't be enough to quell the tempest of my wrath. So, I was sent to Mike, who was tasked with the mission to purge my soul of its rage before I could ever hope to be reborn. But no one could turn back time. Instead, Mike used the Hughes tone to create a mirror world identical to the one I knew. He erased my memories of the pain that followed, allowing me to live again with only the memories of my earlier, happier days. But this world is not real, is it? It's just a fantasy built from my memories, right? Just as I was about to drown in that hopeless thought, Mike's dry, weathered hand gently patted my head. He sighed, "This is why I wanted you to let go of those memories. This world is an illusion, yes, but not entirely. At the very least, you and your mother are real souls in it. In a world that constantly teeters toward chaos, humans are the only bastions of order. We are incessantly nudged by unseen forces towards chaos, be it in the tapestry of our relationships or the balance of our health. Your mother's illness wasn't just from exhaustion, it was her fate. But now, someone has deliberately altered her fate. Her destiny has changed, and perhaps it's a blessing in disguise." Once Amanda's condition had stabilized, I walked out of the hospital, driven by a fiery urge to unearth the truth. As I gazed at the findings, fury surged through me, and I hurled the report to the floor. The document suggested the car crash was merely an unfortunate twist of fate. The driver's wife had gone into labor, and in his haste, he had collided with Amanda's car. Amanda was knocked unconscious, while the driver, barely injured, quickly sought help for his wife, even assisting in pulling Amanda from the wreckage. It all seemed too perfect. No matter how many times I reviewed the report, the facts remained the same. Yet, deep in my gut, I knew the accident wasn't random. I knew who was behind it, even if I lacked the proof. Blinded by rage, I stormed into Helen's villa. I grabbed her by the hair and slapped her hard across the face. She screamed, but I didn't stop. Dragging her like a ragged doll, I threw her into the bathroom. The sound of her gasping for air was music to my ears. I filled the bathtub with cold water and shoved her head under, again and again. Between her choked sobs, I screamed, "Was it you? Tell me. Those were 4 lives you ruined. How dare you? How could you let innocent people die for your selfish desires? You believe you can keep it all hidden. You don't want to speak. All right, that's just perfect. I'll beat the truth out of you if I have to." Helen clenched her teeth, refusing to speak. Just as I was about to make her suffer more, Bruce burst into the room. In a split second, he backhanded me so hard that my vision blurred. The stinging slap numbed half my face, but through the haze, I saw Helen's fleeting, triumphant smile. Something wasn't right. If this had only been Helen's doing, Bruce wouldn't have defended her so fiercely. There was more to this. As I rubbed my stinging cheek, my mind raced. Then I remembered a small detail I'd overlooked. When Bruce's hand came down on me, the bracelet with its red beads slipped into view from beneath his sleeve. A shiver coursed through me. I recognized the implication all too well. Bruce, a man who always dismissed superstitions, had turned to dark forces. Growing up in a rural background, he had always been averse to anything supernatural, but now, it seemed he had embraced it. The following day, I inquired with the nurse about the room where the wife of the driver was staying. Carrying a fruit basket, I made my way to her room. She was reclined in the bed. Her features were exquisitely delicate. Beside her stood a man tending to her with the utmost care. It dawned on me then why our destinies were the ones twisted by malice. Upon my entrance, the man's expression barely shifted to surprise. His influence and means dwarfed my own. He likely knew I would come all along. He was John Brown, the CEO of the company that stood as Bruce's fiercest competitor. Their corporations like fire and water for supremacy in the entertainment sector were perpetually at odds, clashing, but John was different from Bruce. He didn't possess the same cutthroat edge, or at least, not in the manner Bruce did. We made a pact then and there. I would enlist Mike to break the dark forces controlling Bruce. John, in turn, would manage the media storm, using his expertise in the entertainment industry to sway public opinion. Soon after, a juicy piece of gossip hit the news, topping trending searches for days. The article depicted John as a vengeful executive who, in a fury over a failed investment, deliberately reversed his car to injure his rival's former partner. The story cast Bruce as the epitome of fatherly affection towards the daughter from his previous marriage. He regularly took his daughter to school himself, a fact her classmates could all confirm. Did this act reflect a perversion of character or a decline in ethics? As the debate online intensified, opinions swirled, yet the tide of public sentiment largely supported Bruce, who used the situation to his advantage. He held a press conference, basking in the attention like a pig in mud. Watching him smirk into the cameras, I sneered, "The good days are yet to come. Don't get too cocky." John strategically scheduled his press conference for the exact same time, sparking online chatter about an impending rivalry between the two. My phone buzzed. It was Bruce, demanding I attend his conference to play the part of the dutiful daughter. I agreed without hesitation. After all, the show couldn't go on without me. The online world was abuzz with speculation. John's company was witnessing a continuous drop in stock value. The anticipation for the press conference was palpable, and when the day arrived, both locations were thronged with reporters. We were met with an onslaught of lenses and mics as soon as we stepped in. Following Bruce's fervent address, he beckoned me to come forward for a warm interaction. I rose, approached his side, and addressed the crowd through the microphone. "My dad is truly a great person. Not only is he amazing to me, but he's also wonderful to his son who isn't actually his." I pressed a button, and the large screen behind us flickered to life. The first slide displayed a paternity test result, proving there was no biological connection between Bruce and his son. Then came the photos of Helen's infidelities. There she was, partying with male models and engaging in group debauchery. Worst of all, she even coerced minors for her twisted desires. Bruce's face turned a sickly shade of green, his eyes bulging with fury as he turned to glare at Helen. Helen, from her seat in the crowd, was abruptly thrust into the spotlight by the throng of reporters. Her face was illuminated by the incessant flicker of camera flashes, creating a vivid spectrum across her features. Her son, only 3 and oblivious to the gravity of the situation, pointed at the screen and innocently shouted, "Mommy." The atmosphere surged with heightened excitement. As I observed Helen teetering on the edge of collapse, a wave of exhilaration washed over me. Yet, this was merely the opening act. If this was already too much for her, what would she do when faced with the forthcoming revelations? Meanwhile, at John's press conference, everything was serene, almost joyful in contrast to Bruce's chaos. Mike had seamlessly transitioned back into his role as an influencer with a massive following, instantly engaging his audience with a live. Mike, now a viral online celebrity with millions of followers, began a live show. Whenever a reporter tried to disrupt the calm with malicious questions, Mike would offer them a free reading. One by one, they were stunned into silence, forgetting their mission as they eagerly asked about their futures, like wealth, career, and love life. But Mike was waiting for the perfect moment. The divine timing had to be just right. As the energy in the room reached its peak, he focused, his face growing grave. He moved the beads on his wrist rapidly, chanting under his breath, "Break." Then, he snapped the spell into place. Back at Bruce's conference, chaos erupted as BPM. Back at Bruce's conference, chaos erupted as both Bruce and Helen collapsed, vomiting filth. Blood mixed with their bile as they writhed on the floor, clutching their stomachs in agony. "This is backlash," I announced to the stunned reporters. "They tried to alter my mother's fate and John's family's fate with dark magic. Now, Harry reaping what they sowed." The media was in a frenzy, their cameras capturing every gruesome detail. In the days that followed, Grandeur Entertainment's stock plummeted, hitting the limit down repeatedly. John seized the opportunity, buying up shares and taking control of the company. Amanda's health improved, and John was busy managing the merger. Bruce and Helen, on the other hand, weren't so lucky. When the fortress crumbled, it seemed like everyone was eager to give it a shove. Bruce, through the years, had amassed a legion of adversaries. Now, one scandal after another surfaced like waves crashing against a weakening dam. He was exposed for abusing his company power to coerce female artists, while Helen was sentenced to 12 years for her involvement in coercing minors. The floodgates had opened, and there was no stopping the avalanche of their sins. Grandeur Entertainment was found guilty of massive tax evasion, amounting to hundreds of millions. Numerous local officials were implicated as accomplices. Their dirty secrets were exposed for the world to see. Female artists who had been treated as bargaining chips within the company finally had their voices heard. The industry was rocked by stories of abuse, manipulation, and coercion. One actress, driven to despair years ago, had jumped to her death. The world had turned its back on them. They truly got what they deserved. Helen, once known for her beauty and rebellious spirit, found herself harshly disciplined in prison. Her life of luxury was gone, replaced by the cold, bitter reality of living off others' charity. It was a fitting end for someone who had built her life on the wealth and status of a rich husband. With both Bruce and Helen in jail, my brother was left unattended. His biological father, ashamed and unwilling to be involved, wanted nothing to do with him. I couldn't forget how, in my past life, this little boy had been cruelly violent, eventually killing me in a senseless act of rage. I found it impossible to approach him with an open heart, even though he was now just a child. I set up an evaluation for chromosomal anomalies, and as expected, he was diagnosed with XYY syndrome, commonly associated with heightened aggression. During this period, Amanda was released from the hospital because her health was completely restored. We decided to enroll him in a specialized school focused on behavioral correction. I consulted Mike, asking him about the boy's fate. Will he be reborn into the animal realm? Mike glanced at me. His genes weren't his choice. It depends on his karma after intervention. With everything resolved, I was keen to get back to my studies and witness all the wonders I missed out on in my previous existence. But Mike had other plans. That stubborn old man insisted I meditate in the mountains for 3 months before I could return to my normal life. He bestowed upon me the name Lethe with the hope that I would forget the past. I knew it was for my own good. Like in my past life, I worked hard, determined to get into the university I had longed for but never experienced. And this time, I made it. As I walked onto the campus, a sense of peace washed over me. Everything was falling into place just as it should. Now, sitting here, recalling the painful memories of my past, I found peace in my heart. Everything was moving in a good direction. Spring was on its way, bringing with it the promise of fresh starts. Side story about Mike today, fate assigned me an unexpected duty to mentor a young girl. As soon as I saw her face, even with all my experience, I was taken aback. Her appearance was horrifying, her face was distorted, her eyes were bulging, and her head was swollen. Her tiny frame was marred by more than a dozen wounds, and her skin was a canvas of countless bruises. Yet, despite the brutality etched into her flesh, her spirit remained radiant with purity. This was not just a death, it was an injustice. Gazing at her, I could see the nascent fury in her eyes, threatening to spill over with vengeance. Her eyes were filled with a deathly stillness. Without a word, I could hear the silent scream in her heart. She wanted them to die for the wrongs they committed. I delved into her memories. Her existence could only be encapsulated by the word tragic. Her classmates, her father's betrayal led to a painful divorce, her mother was ground down by relentless work until illness took her away, sneered and shunned her, her lover discarded her with heartless indifference, and in a final, devastating blow, her own brother ended her life with deliberate malice. Each memory etched a sorrowful portrait of her fleeting time on earth. Even death himself whispered that he dared not claim her soul, afraid her essence might cut his own existence short. And Sharon, the ferryman, paused with her coin in hand, wary of the deep resentment that might linger in her tormented spirit. I watched the two, letting out a resigned sigh before finally taking on the guardianship of this young girl. Using the Hughes tone, I wove an illusionary world, a mirror to reality itself. To keep this world spinning, I also had to step inside its bounds. I scrubbed clean her slate of sorrowful memories and sent her into this world carrying only the happiest shards of her past. There she was, in the illusion, full of mischief. Her pranks on her father and his lover brought a mischievous sparkle to her eyes. A stifled giggle behind her hand, and the way she nestled close to her mother were the essence of childhood. Within this realm, I turned into an influencer, riding the wave of digital popularity, and breathed easier knowing she was one of my followers. After untangling some of her knotted thoughts, I was summoned for pressing matters, believing a short departure would be inconsequential. Yet, I was back just in time. Without my swift return, she might have unleashed chaos. In my absence, with malevolent spirits wreaking havoc, the seals on her former life's memories weakened. Thankfully, her mother's altered destiny still held a sliver of hope, which I used to anchor the girl's turbulent spirit. She asked for my aid against those disruptive specters, and I was more than willing to assist. With the turmoil settled, I hoped she would find peace, yet a whisper of vengeance still clung to her. With a word to her mother, I whisked the girl away to the mountains for 3 months of tranquil retreat to purge the last vestiges of her wrath before she could descend. How did I achieve this? Because she was far too clever, demanding I confess that this dreamscape had threads tied to reality. She only felt satisfied when she learned that her father, his lover, and their child faced a grim fate following her death. I was merely attempting to shield her from further suffering and prevent her from entangling herself too deeply in the snares of karma. Truly, she was an ungrateful child. As I prepared to depart, there at the mountain's foot lay a jar of exquisite wine. With an affectionate smile, I whispered, "You've never been able to take even the slightest criticism, have you, Lethe?"